Hello and welcome to Sword vs. Dragons, where I show you how Dungeons and Dragons is a badly designed mess, and how I fixed it in my own system, Ishanekon World Shapers. This episode is all about the illusion of choice in Dungeons and Dragons. You would think, hey, Dungeons and Dragons, there's so many classes and subclasses, there are tons of choices on how to customize your character, right? Not really once you start taking a closer look. The way Dungeons & Dragons allows you to customize your own character is limited by several factors, and you don't actually get to make that many choices while creating them and leveling them up. Let's for example presume that you want to create a classic heavy armor frontliner with a weapon in hand charging into the enemy. So let's start with a level 1 character. Again, the only real choice we have is the fighter, so you pretty much don't have a choice. Yes, there's a paladin, but that's magical, and that's not part of the character that we described just now. It's just pure fighting prowess. So alright, we just got one class. And what other choices do you get to make at level 1 as a fighter? Other than race and background, which has rather minor effects. Well, you get to pick your fighting style, which, let me guess, will make your fighter very diverse, right? Depending on what you choose. Well, you got great weapon fighting, which basically increases your damage when you're fighting with two-handed weapons. Or you have dueling, which basically increases your damage when you're fighting with a one-handed weapon. So, pretty similar effects and no real difference. You got protection, which is just horribly designed. Or you have the very boring defense, which just gives you +1 to your armor class. There's only one of those features that really changes up your playstyle to weapon fighting, that allows you to increase the damage of your second attack that you make while dual wielding. But that takes your bonus actions, which clashes with a lot of builds. So it's, in most cases, not really that optimal. So, But I give you that it does feel different. That's it. That's all the choices. Making pretty much all level 1 fighters feel the same. But then you might say, hey, I can still choose my weapon, like two-handed sword versus a maul, which do the exact damage, or a great axe, which is statistically just flat out worse than a sword or a maul. And with the one-handed weapons it seems worse. Longsword, same as battle axe, same as warhammer, they all deal the same damage. The difference is the damage type, but in like 99% of cases that doesn't matter in Dungeons and Dragons. In another video we'll go more into details how the weapon choice of Dungeons and Dragons is kinda pathetic, but note for now that your weapon choice doesn't really matter. It's still mechanically pretty much the same. Unlike in Ishanekon World Shapers, where you start off with your sub-archetype directly at the start, which deeply helps you flavor your fighter in one direction or another. For example, you could take the Rusher. Now you're somebody mobile that storms into combat, no hesitations. You could be a warrior with a focus on the attack action and the balance approach. Do I deal more damage now? Do I increase precision? You could be the duelist, focusing on maneuver, comboing abilities. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Every archetype has 14 sub-archetypes for an insane amount of options. Also, you start off with a lesser talent. If you take the war archetype, even 2 lesser talents. If you take path of attack, since we're building a frontliner who attacks with weapons, we're probably going to attack it, that means you start with 3 lesser talents. Let's compare the lesser talents that go in a similar direction to the fighting style. If we take two-handed wielder, you get to re-roll the damage of your weapon, making two-handed weapons very reliable. Also, two-handed melee weapons have default-wise 1 meter more range. So you get that different feeling that you have more of a zone of control compared to other weapons. If you just have one-handed weapons without a shield, you get one-handed attacker +2 to the attack roll. Now you're building a precise build, which makes one-handed weapons reliable but weak. You can build around that, maybe make an over-aim build, or just profit from the +2. Maybe have a one-handed melee weapon in one-handed, or a one-handed ranged weapon in one hand, so you can flexibly attack one turn with the one-handed hand and then the other with the ranged attack. No need to switch weapons if the situation is called for it. But what if you take a shield? Now you get reactive shield, 1 extra reaction point, really emphasizing the defensive nature of the shield, allowing you to react to more attacks of the enemy. And of course, multi-wielder when you wield more than one weapon, allowing you an additional attack that deals half damage, which in my systems also means you can now make 2 maneuver attacks, 1 for each weapon attack, which gives you a huge strategic variation with which you can experiment and combo around. See how those lesser talents already give you a fighter far more character, depending on a basic weapon choice, compared to the fighting styles from Dungeons and Dragons. It's a pretty substantial difference. If we go back to Dungeons & Dragons, to building your fighter, you say, okay, level 1 you don't get many choices, but you level up, level 3 you finally get your subclass. And that's pretty much the only real choice to get for the rest of the game. There are feats, but also bad news, casters are basically better than martial characters after level 5 in every single category. If you want to keep up with the casters, you have to power game to the absolute max with a fighter to remotely keep up. So now your only real options are Great Weapon Master plus Pole Arm Master, because anything else cannot really keep up. And if you go for a ranged fighter, you need Crossbow Expert and Sharpshooter. Any other combo is not at all viable after level 5. So there goes all the options. Sorry about that. But then you might say, okay, fighters are badly balanced, but casters, there I get to choose spells every level. That's a lot of choices to customize my character. I've got some bad news for you, buddy. These spells are also horribly balanced. So if you want to be viable, spells have kind of already picked for you. You want a reliable ranged damage dealing cantrip? You got Firebolt. Everything else doesn't really do much damage, or has very niche uses. I guess if damage isn't optimal, you get Ray of Frost. That's kind of it. I mean, if you look at your other options, Acid Splash, too situational to be effective. Chill Touch, also kind of situational, at least somewhat decent damage against a single target, but still not really optimal. Poison Spray, horrible range, horrible damage type, not at all viable. Shocking Grabs, nice, but you're limited to melee range, something where as a wizard you definitely want not to be at. And those are just the cantrips. When it comes to the spells, you have to take Shield. It's so overpowered that it alone makes most casters tankier than martial characters. I mean, Fireball is the most effective area of effect spell, so you kinda also have to take it. Counterspell, very important. See how the list starts to fill up? With all the overpowered choices that you kinda have to take, otherwise you feel like you're nerfing yourself. And that's the problem, right? You can take the other choices, but it feels bad since you're purposefully leaving power on the table just to fulfill your role-playing fantasy. That's not what a role-playing game should do. A role-playing game should empower you to build the type of character that you want to play and not limit you to the optimal options. If we compare it to my game, for example, every single damage type has a variety of reliable options for all ranges, for area of effect, so you can specialize in whatever damage type you want. There's a multitude of options, over 800, far better balanced than anything Dungeons and Dragons has to offer. And yet still, the damage types keep their unique nature with greater talents that allow you to specialize in specific damage types, like advanced heat damage that allows you to set an enemy on fire every time you deal heat damage, or advanced psychic damage that allows you to drain the willpower of the enemy whenever you deal psychic damage to them, and so on. And every damage type has at least 3 unique abilities that really help form that core identity for the damage type without sacrificing viability. One of my favorites, for example, is one of the physical damage type abilities, High Impact Blow, which does not just deal damage but also catapults your enemy across the room. And every single damage type has their 3 unique abilities. I hope you start to see that Dungeons and Dragons really doesn't give you as many choices as you think it gives you. Also, something you have to take into account, which is for every character true, you don't really get to make any choices whenever you level up. And some of the levels you don't even get anything, which doesn't really make leveling up feel that important in Dungeons and Dragons. Unlike Ishanekon World Shapers, where every level you get to choose between a lesser talent or a greater talent, which themselves have hundreds of options each. And of course you get to learn new abilities. Again, over 800. So you usually make at least 2 choices per level up. You start to see which of both products is the superior one. And one tiny tip, Ishanekon World Shapers is free. Link in the description to the website. Everything 100% free. All the 140 sub-archetypes. All 800 plus abilities. All 500 plus talents. And so on. Trust me, if you want to build a character and play it just like you want it, don't play Dungeons & Dragons. Play Ishanekon World Shapers instead. See you around in the next video where I'll talk about the martial caster balancing problems that Dungeons & Dragons has and how I fixed that in Ishanekon World Shapers. Thank you for watching, like and subscribe. See you around. Bye!